Christmas is very, very dumb. Oh yeah, you're probably curious about the rebranding and basically all of this. Well... That's me. I'll link a full explanation down below in the description.
So Halloween's the thing, am I right? Another time it rolls around, and another time I can't celebrate because I'm trapped in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. I'm not one to usually do Halloween videos, mostly since the only stuff I can really think of that fit the mood of the season are horror games. And for the better part of my life, I've never been that big of a horror enthusiast. I've handled media with horror-like themes just fine, but when it comes to straight-up horror, I'm a chicken. I'm a giant pussy when it comes to being scared, and I get pretty squeamish around the sight of blood and gore, at least when it's more realistic instead of the most cartoonish over-the-top thing ever, which in that case, I'm all over it. Also, the jackass who brought jump scares as a concept into existence deserves to wear soaking wet socks to bed every night for all eternity. I've at least been making an effort to rectify this with both the movies I've watched and the games I've played. This brings me to Little Nightmares, an indie horror platformer that I heard was a thing but didn't actually own until I got it along with Detroit Dumb Human earlier this year. It kinda sat in my library gathering dust with like 50 other games at this point, but I figured Halloween's rolling around, I don't have anything planned after Spider-Man for videos, I like platformers, and I'm getting more into horror, so why not? I'll give it a go.
Going into this game, I didn't know a whole lot about it other than that it was a spoopy platformer by the guys who did some Little Big Planet stuff a few years back, and also that it was received fairly well, but that aside, I went into this game pretty blind. Here's what I thought.
So the story of Little Nightmares is actually pretty vague. There's not a whole lot that the game directly tells you other than that your character is a little girl named Six. She's trying to escape from some giant ship called the Maw. She dreams about some freaky looking lady and a bunch of people want to kill her.
Fun times!
The plot and themes of the game are pretty much all conveyed strictly through visual storytelling. Not a single word of dialogue is spoken, and you'll hardly find any actual cutscenes. What you see is all you get, which isn't a bad thing since the entire story is based around how you interpret it. Your goals are pretty straightforward. Avoid getting captured, go after this geisha-looking bitch, and ultimately escape them all. Now the central story is where things aren't so obvious. The identity of the lady and the origins behind the Maw, along with everyone who inhabits it, are left up in the air, though a number of tiny blink-and-you-miss-it details throughout the environment make the picture a whole lot more clear. Photos that you can find in the living spaces of both Six and Psycho Bitch indicate that the two share some kind of relationship, probably mother-daughter, and a number of drawings of these creatures called gnomes indicate some kind of interaction between them and the kids there. The gnomes always running away from you lead me to believe that something happened there where they're all afraid of basically everybody. Probably something horrible. Well, that or maybe they're just playing tag-your-it with Six. Obviously the most probable explanation in a game as lively and upbeat as Little Nightmares. Though it's quite easy to deduce that there is some shady shit going down in the Maw. The lower level is some kind of daycare for kids watched over by a janitor with long arms. I like calling him Lanky Kong because of the arms and because he's got no style or grace, yet he's got one hell of a funny face. The level above is a kitchen where it's pretty obvious that people are placed in sacks and lifted up here to be cut into pieces and ground up and prepared for cooking, and this game can depict mass genocide while getting away with a T rating, but would probably get a hard M the moment somebody drops an F-bomb.
The human race is full to the brim with hypocrites. Just browse Twitter for 5 seconds without gouging your eyeballs out and you'll get what I'm talking about.
The top of the ship is where a bunch of ugly, rich cannibals gather around to stuff their faces. And the freaky lady seems to be the mastermind behind it all. At least how I perceived it, I noticed the story kinda sorta has an overarching theme relating to the deadly sin of gluttony. Throughout the journey, Six is very malnourished and frequently gets hungry in scripted events, with the food she eats going from normal stuff to living creatures. It gets pretty gruesome to watch. The customers are these obese, hideous monsters that devour pretty much everything in sight, to the point where they start up some giant chase sequence to eat you like a breadstick at Olive Garden. Run away, little girl. You don't want to be eaten by Dan Schneider. It's a horrible way to die. Their insatiable appetite drawing them toward the mall for an all-you-can-eat buffet of slaughtered people. Children are essentially brought to the island, made to grow large to be slaughtered like animals, or sand people, cooked in the kitchen by that Muppet chef guy, and eaten.
I really wish there was some way to describe all of that without it sounding like the most fucked up thing on the planet, but sadly, no such way exists, so I'm sorry, you had to deal with that.
For the most part, the story and world presented here are pretty interesting to look into, though a few things about it, at least for me, sadly hold the story back from being anything I feel compelled to really dwell on or think about. For one, the whole thing with the mysterious lady I feel could have been better implemented into the story that Little Nightmares was trying to tell. She only showed up once at the beginning in a dream sequence, and she showed up again so late into the game that I kinda just forgot about her beforehand. My reaction to her reappearing was essentially, oh yeah, you exist, I guess. As someone who's clearly supposed to be the mastermind behind the whole operation, I feel the game should have done more to make her presence felt throughout the facility as the overseer of everything, instead of just showing up at the end of the game. I've seen interpretations of her character described as having once been beautiful, becoming horribly disfigured, hiding her face and killing everyone more beautiful than her, as well as forcing the chefs to hide their faces behind ugly masks. This does make for an interesting character, but again, it would have been more effective if she had a presence of some kind throughout the game. The ending feels like the game kinda just comes to an awkward halt and left me going, what the hell just happened and what did I even accomplish? Sadly, in a more dazed and confused kind of way, rather than a compelling way.
There is a compelling story somewhere in Little Nightmares that you can see shine through every now and again, but the narrative is sadly brought down by a number of things that really keep it from hitting the mark and reaching its full potential.
The story might not have hooked me as much as I would have liked, but this is a video game and there is still the game aspect, so let's see how that holds the title up. If you're familiar with other indie horror platformers like Limbo or Inside, Little Nightmares is pretty reminiscent of those two games, albeit with a 3D axis of movement also brought in. It's still largely a game where you're ultimately going to the left or right, and the camera is locked at a side-scroller kind of view. So Little Nightmares is kinda 3D, but contains the design sensibilities that you'd see more often with strictly 2D platformers. I'd say this minor focus on 3D does wonders in helping Little Nightmares distinguish itself from other horror titles like it. The game is full of a number of different puzzles that utilize the 3D space and movement you're given, making them feel more complex than they probably would have otherwise been in a game that's strictly 2D. You'll be doing a lot of jumping, climbing, picking up and throwing random shit on the floor, playing around with physics, sneaking around, and running away from everybody that wants to kill you, which would be everyone. I wouldn't say that any of the puzzles or challenges really blew my mind or anything, but I still found the gameplay to make for a fun and stimulating few hours. I really enjoyed seeing what inventive ways and scenarios the game came up with to utilize the 3D spaces you're given. The rooms are all laid out clear enough for you to understand what you need to do in order to solve the puzzle. Only a couple I remember really leaving me stumped. I think what most contributes to the engagement every obstacle provides is how small and vulnerable 6 is in this dangerous world. To put it simply, your character is more fragile than my self-esteem. You're incredibly tiny in comparison to your surroundings, making it so most of the path you have to take is pretty unorthodox, often involving you crawling through air vents and climbing up top of stuff. You're often too short to even open a door with the knob, so best hope you can find a chair to climb on. Oh, and be careful where you fall because dead. It's hard to really judge how far a distance you can fall without obliterating your leg bones, and sometimes it feels like it's kinda scripted where you will or won't die when falling. I'd recommend trusting a large height not to kill you as much as I trust Fox News to not spew diarrhea out into the world. Because your character is a small and everybody else is the size of my porn folder, probably shouldn't have said that out loud. They can easily pick you up like a doll, so best avoid Lanky Kong and Muppet Chef by either hiding or running the hell away. I like these challenges enough. I think there's some really adrenaline pumping moments and a great way to convey the danger of the world, but at the same time I feel they're kinda dragged down by the AI. Might just be me, but it feels like the way the AI behaves doesn't feel all that consistent. Sometimes sound gets their attention, sometimes it doesn't, and the fact that they always seem to be in the exact same room as you at the exact same time tends to feel way too convenient. It gets to the point where it's hard to feel like you're really caught off guard by their appearance. Along the way, there are extras like these ceramic doll things you can throw and break, gnomes you can hug, and lanterns you can light, but I never found much of an incentive to actively seek any of them out, and the only collectibles I really bothered with were the ones that I could easily get along the main path. I found out you can pick up those dolls completely by accident, and I didn't even bother with the gnomes because you have to chase after them, and Enter the Dragonfly traumatized me for life with that shit, so no thank you.
I know there's probably an achievement for doing them all, but you can attach an achievement to literally any mundane task and half-heartedly claim it's an incentive to do it, but that doesn't mean it actually is one.
I can tolerate most of these issues, but the biggest problem, and one I really can't ignore, is the camera. Oh my god. The camera positioning in Little Nightmares is actually horrible. It's pretty much impossible to get a proper idea of where you are in the 3D space or to actually line yourself up with anything because the angle that the camera's locked in for the whole game is just so bad. Combine that with ridiculously long load times after death, and yeah, the game can get seriously tedious and annoying after a while.
I guess what I said about the story can also apply to the gameplay as well. It does so much right, and it feels like there's a fantastic, absolutely phenomenal game somewhere in here, but there's far too many aspects about the game that feel unpolished for me to call it a truly great game.
You know, it's a shame that the story and gameplay have these problems, since you can tell how much love and effort was put into Little Nightmares just by looking at it. The game absolutely nails the look and atmosphere it's going for. The interior of the maw is pretty dark with very little environmental lighting, making 6's lighter a common tool for use. It looks gorgeous whenever lighting becomes more prominent, with environmental lights effectively highlighting the path that you need to take just by contrasting with the rest of the environment being shrouded in darkness. In addition to lighting your way, the glow that your lighter emits makes for some beautiful shots with how it reacts to everything. At times, I've kept the lighter on solely to see how the shadows and refractions look. It's hard to not be impressed looking at how good all the modeling and texture work is for an indie title. Pretty much everything is gigantic compared to 6, effectively dwarfing her and giving the entire world a large sense of scale. Every character has a grotesque or otherwise creepy demeanor and animations to go along with their appearance. They give off a twisted and disturbing fairy tale-like vibe, making you never feel safe in the presence of anyone anywhere due to how unnatural they look. The general color scheme for everything looks drab and muted, while your character 6 wears a coat that, by stark contrast, is a lot brighter and more vibrant. It helps to ensure that no matter what point you are in the game, your character is always visible on screen and the main focal point as it should be. I guess it's kinda like the red coat from Schindler's List, and speaking of which, how about some Holocaust imagery for you? It's at least less on the nose than it was in Detroit Dumb Human.
Never gonna let Android concentration camp go for as long as I live.
The overall art direction is really good, but I was even more impressed by the sound design. You'll be hearing subdued background ambiance for most of the game, making the world feel more authentic while being quiet enough to not drown out any of the sound effects. Sound effects range from doors creaking open, and even your own footsteps are amplified so dramatically, especially during quieter parts of the game. It gives a sense of paranoia that you could easily attract unwanted attention from making too much noise. Also giving an idea of how large the ship is when tossing an object down into a bottomless pit. Overall, Little Nightmares is a bit of a weird one for me. There's a lot I like about it, but at the same time, I feel there's some story and gameplay elements that comparatively aren't up to par with the rest of what the game has to offer. I'd say a bit of extra game polish and reworking a few story elements would have allowed the game to shine a lot more. As it stands though, I'd say I overall enjoyed the game, and if you've got a bit of extra cash to spare, you could certainly do much worse.
It's a pretty short game and only worth about 1 or 2 playthroughs, so be careful about how much it costs before you pick it up if you decide to. The complete edition of the game comes with a few extra DLC chapters, so if you want to get the most out of the game for the least amount of money, that's the version you should go for. That's all I got. Take care, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and have a lovely Halloween.